everybody. My name is Grace Hamilton. I'm a junior political science major, Spanish minor from Los Angeles, California, and I go to Howard University. I'm the secretary of an organization called the 50, which basically we aim to give college students a platform to talk about voting rights issues and fight against systems of oppression. So I'm very excited for today.
Thank you. And let's go over to Jenita.
Hi, good evening. I'm Jenita Davis. I'm a senior interdisciplinary studies major with a concentration in bioethics at Howard University. And I'm also a reproductive justice fellow for the 2020 to 2022 school year. I'm just excited to just discuss with you all and see all the insight you guys have to offer.
Great, thank you so much. And finally, I am going to pass it over to Javante.
Hello, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Giavante Bishop, and I serve as the program manager for the Next Generation Leadership Institute at In Our Own Voice, National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. It is certainly an extreme pleasure to be here with you all today, and I am excited for the rich dialogue that we're going to have around getting out the vote on HBCU campuses.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your partnership on behalf of Platform. We are super, super, super appreciative of you and your power blazer. We love to see it. We love to see it. Platform is an organization dedicated to uplifting the voices of femme-identified people and giving them the tools that they need to communicate with their lawmakers. We do that through a variety of ways, including lobby days. We also provide support for our community through community hours. Recently, this past summer, we actually went ahead and went on a listening tour and wanted to connect with the members of our network and their members of their networks to understand what young people need out of an election. And we came up with a full report. So this is a pretty timely report to be sharing with you all, and we will share that link in the chat so that you all have access to it. We will also be having a Black Leader Community Hour coming up after the election. We are aware that this election cycle is, how do I put this tactfully, a lot. And so we will be having a community hour. It'll be before the election on October 20th at 6 p.m. And we will also be sharing that link in the chat. That community hour will be particularly for Black femme-identified folks, just recognizing the burden that is kind of placed around the stigma of Black women will save us, vote like a Black woman, but then Blackness, particularly Black womanhood, is criminalized 364 days of the year. Thank you, Jen, for dropping that link. Appreciate you so much. So with that being said, and with our announcements kind of gotten out of the way, we will go ahead and get started. So as I said, my name is Christy Owie. I am the External Affairs Manager here at Platform. And like Alex, I am a Morgan State Bear, where I am getting my master's degree. So very exciting, go Bears. So let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. We will ask our panelists some general questions that they are free to jump in on, and then we will ask some targeted questions to each one of them. They're all free to answer. There is a chat box function. If you need someone to repeat something or to elaborate on something, please let us know. Also, you should see that there are closed captions. So if you are needing closed captions, those are available. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. So if you need to revisit it, or if you don't feel comfortable saying something because you know it's being recorded, we want to make sure that you have that full disclosure. Because knowledge is power, especially when we're talking about getting out the HBCU vote. So let's go ahead and jump into the first question, general question for all of our panelists to answer. Why do you believe it is important to vote? Again, panelists, why do you believe it is important to vote? I'll let you all take a minute and just jump in when you feel ready.
Hi, this is me, it's Grace. I believe that voting is important because it really sets the groundwork for people to be able to organize and, be active politically. For people that maybe aren't sure about how they can engage in the political process, it's supposed to be like an easy way that you can do that. Of course, we know because of voter suppression, it isn't always easy for people to be able to vote, but for people that can, I really see it as an essential way to be able to make your voice heard. I also believe that grassroots organizing is also very important in terms of making change, but as an organizer, I can say that it's a lot easier to sway officials' minds about things when they're already kind of leaning your direction. And the way that you make sure that that happens is by voting people into office that reflect your beliefs.
I'm muted, sorry. A little bit of Zoom fatigue coming up towards the end of the week. Thank you so much for that, Grace, especially on touching on how much easier it could potentially be to go ahead and dismantle systems and improve systems if you're already working with leaders who sort of kind of think the way you do can be swayed. Any other panelists want to jump in and share why they believe it is important to vote?
I can share why I personally vote. I remember growing up, my family was very big on Black history and like all Black history. So I've always seen voting as a sign of activism or as a way, because I have a very expanded view of what activism is. I don't always think it's protesting, although that's a big part of it. So for me, my vote is my voice and I won't let anyone take that away. So I vote because it is a chance for me to show activism. It's a chance for me to say, hey, 50 years ago, I'm Black and I'm a woman. I probably could not vote as easily as I can today. So I will not let the people who died and the people who got hosed on and a bunch of other things and just butchered and everything else that you could possibly imagine die in vain or take that struggle in vain. So that's the reason why I personally vote.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. It is super important to note that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors each and every day that we move through this country as Black women. And as HBCU students, we are standing on the shoulders of the students who came before us, who made activism central to their campuses. So thank you for that. Before we move on to the next question, would love to take one more thought from one of our panelists on why they personally vote. So feel free to jump in.
Well, I guess I'll jump in and share a little bit. I'll reintroduce myself. My name is Kalea. And one of the reasons why I vote is because I know that I have a lot of insight and I know that I have a lot of aspirations and things that I wish to see change. And so I know that the only way to really, really, really have my voice heard and to really, really see change enacted is by voting. Because at the end of the day, it is about who's in control, who is the one curating the laws, who is the one enacting the laws and executing and passing these laws and these bills ultimately. And so I know that is the only avenue necessary, well, not necessarily to take, but I know that that is the strongest avenue to take and the most impactful avenue to take as far as voting, because it is the one that is the most impactful and where I will most definitely have my voice heard. And in that aspect, I have someone who is fighting for my voice as well to be heard. So yeah, I'd probably say that's why I personally vote. And granted, there are still barriers to voting, such as voter suppression, as mentioned before, and so much more. But the trials that people face shows in itself just how powerful and impactful voting is. And so that's really ultimately why I vote.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kalea. Thank you, thank you. And I see you're representing Dillard. Okay.
Yes,
Hashtag MyDU. Shout out.
Yes.
But I thank you so much for sharing, the importance of voting. Kind of going back to Alex's point, there's more than one way to make your voice heard. Protesting is important, but going to the ballot box, especially for local elections, is important too. It's a way to make your voice heard. It's a way to get your leaders' attention. So thank you so much for kind of just bringing all of the points together That's a perfect way to kind of wrap up question number 1. Let's go ahead and jump into question number 2. Speaking specifically to HBCU students and the history of voter suppression for Black communities, why is it important to uplift HBCU students around Get Out the Vote initiatives? Why is it important to uplift HBCU students around GOTV or Get Out the Vote initiatives? And again, we're going to go ahead and popcorn. You all can jump in as you see fit.
I would definitely say that when it comes to HBCU students and voting, I always like to acknowledge the fact that one, not just with HBCU students, but with Black communities, there is a primary reason as to why they're working so hard and tirelessly to try and suppress our vote. And I just want to make that clear because if our vote did not matter, not minus the marginalized communities, specifically talking about Black communities, if our votes did not matter, there would be no reason to try and suppress our vote and do whatever they can to make sure that we don't vote, because they know in the back of their minds that in Black communities, we come out in droves and they know that we hold the power that they obviously do not have. So they're going to do whatever it takes to make sure we don't vote. So with that being said, with HBCU students, I think it's imperative that we lift up voting, because it starts with the young people. It starts with us, our age, the college students, ages 18 to 23, and then it goes on forward. Because we all know that when it goes on to older generations, a lot of people are stuck in their old ways. So when it comes back to us, we're the change makers. And I know that sounds very cliche to think about it, but once we get older and we turn our 30s and 40s and 50s, when we look back at those decades and we see that there was no change happening, we're going to think back and wonder, wow, I regret not going out to vote. I regret not taking that one step to making sure that my vote matters. Because I know that, it sounds very cliche to say that, oh, my vote does not matter. But when you look at it from a whole perspective, you have the local level, you have the state level, then you have a federal level. When you don't take that initiative to not voting on your local level, that affects your state level, then at your federal level. It's just a chain reaction. So I just really acknowledge the fact that when it comes to HBCU students, I think we do such a great job to making sure that our vote is casted out there to the public, so that way we know that how we feel and what is happening and is affecting us, not just young people, but Black people in general. Everything that's happening is affecting us in terrible ways. So when we don't vote, it's just going to continue to occur. So when it comes to HBCU students, I think we do such an amazing job just making sure that our vote is out there, our voices are being heard, not just we're there, but our presence is there and people acknowledge that. So I think that's the main reason why voting, especially for HBCU students, is extremely important.
Thank you so much for that. You broke up a little bit at the end, but I think everybody got the overall gist. And I wanted to highlight a really important point that you made, Tyra, around young people. Going back to our listening report that we released earlier this year, young people hold so much political power, and we as constituents should not be ignoring the young people around us. We have to build community with the young folks around us and continue to get the work done. So thank you so much for bringing that point home, especially on HBCU campuses where there's a lot of young people. So thank you so much for that. Would anyone else like to jump in and share why HBCU campuses are kind of just so pivotal to Get Out the Vote initiatives, and why focusing on students at HBCUs is so important?
I think I can go. I'm a senior at Howard, and I just think as HBCU students, we offer a very unique perspective and our voice in our collegiate background compared to other students. And I also think that just being in the rooms that we're in and experiencing an HBCU culture allows us to recognize our greatness as Black students and recognize all the change that we can bring in voting, in society, just recognizing all the amazing things that we have to offer. And just, I can see the growth in myself, and I know that from freshman year to senior year, there's been an amazing change in ideas and perspective that my HBCU has offered me.
Precisely. Precisely. I love the impact that you put on HBCU students. It's a unique experience. And young Black students across the country have unique experiences. And this is coming from someone whose first degree came from a PWI, but it is a very different experience at an HBCU. And we should definitely be making sure that our Get Out the Vote initiatives are culturally competent for HBCU students. It's not the same approach at every single school, and keeping that in mind and really using that to our power, our collective power, is you hit the head on the nail. It's perfect. You're absolutely right. Moving on to question number 3. What do you feel is at stake on November 3rd? Again, what do you feel is at stake on November 3rd? And I would love if we kick this question off with Alexandra.
I think, well, I'll put it into 2 categories. Women's rights, I think, are a huge, I think that's why this panel specifically is so important. Women's rights are huge. I fear being set back like a few decades with this next election, and just reproductive rights and just having choices. I find it very interesting that there are no regulations on male bodies at all. But there are so many on female bodies, on women bodies, femme identifying, and I think that's crazy. So I think that's one side. And I also think the outcome of this election will also either amplify certain voices or decrease certain voices. We've seen a lot of white nationalist groups and white supremacist groups come out the woodwork all of a sudden. And it's not like they weren't there before. It's just having a certain president in the office that makes them feel so comfortable amplifies their voice, and it also amplifies their actions. And that's a very scary thought, to think that your name could be a hashtag next month or in a few months. So those 2 specific, women's rights, as well as just voices being amplified, as well as some voices being decreased. And so those voices maybe being decreased, will be the Black Lives Matter movement, because apparently there's something so wrong with that statement.
So I would love to jump right in. What I feel is at stake this election are really our fundamental civil liberties. I feel like our lives are on the line this election. I feel as if we've seen that there is an all-out attack on Black lives. And if we do not, as a community, collectively come together and pull together and go to the polls and show up and show out this election, I feel like we will see those civil liberties diminished. So I really feel like we need to vote like our lives depend on it at this point, because in all actuality, they do.
I would like to jump on to what Alex and Giovante said, and just paint the picture of when you're congregated with your family, whether you have brothers, whether you have sisters, fathers, cousins, uncles. When you look at them, it's just a matter of if you don't take the time to actually go out and vote, your father's lives, your brother's lives, cousins, uncles, their lives are at stake too. And I think that's something that we really need to emphasize in society that we're in now. Our Black men in particular, there's too many targets on the back of them. And if we don't vote on November, it's going to be literal open season on Black people, not just Black men, but Black communities in general. And even though we are already being massacred at alarming rates, and the criminal justice system has consistently failed us time after time after time, taking this next step to vote will be our next step to making sure we earn the human rights that we should already have, but we don't have now. So without voting on November 3rd, you are putting yourselves in an even deeper disadvantage than what we're at right now. And it's just going to continue to allow white nationalists to manipulate us and manipulate who we are as people, and taking what we deserve and allowing them to run with it. And I've just been saying this all summer. If you're not going to go out and vote, but you have the capability to go out and protest, let people know, make some noise, then I just look at it as you're preaching to an empty congregation. Because if you're willing to go out here and protest and make some noise, then you should also be willing to also go out there and vote. Because if you don't have elected officials whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, who are not willing to hear what you have to say or care about you as a person, then it doesn't make sense for you to continue to go out there and vote. Continue to go out there and protest. So it is imperative that you go out and vote, so that way you have Black leaders or people that assimilate to what you believe in and that care about you, so that way we get back to what we deserve, and that's human rights.
Thank you all for jumping in and answering this question. Our humanity is definitely on the ballot this year. It's on the ballot every election, but I definitely agree. It's heightened and it's amplified. We do have a question from our audience, and it is from Brad. And Brad says, what are some tangible goals we can be looking for in the future to know if our initiatives for getting out the vote were effective, maybe in 5, 10, or even 20 years? So what are some goals that we can be looking at in the future to know that our get out the vote initiatives, particularly on HBCU campuses, obviously, were effective?
I will heavily emphasize investing into HBCUs and into Black businesses. And I know it just seems so minuscule, but when you invest into a Black business, that goes into a chain reaction. And that's when it allows people to start investing into Black people in general. And particularly in HBCUs, all our HBCUs, regardless of where they rank at, all of our HBCUs are heavily underfunded. And it's because we don't have a lot of people who take the time to actually know what HBCUs are for, why they were devised, and why they still stand to this day. And it goes by far more than just a cultural thing. It's really just, HBCUs have saved so many Black lives, and they're the reason why so many of us are here today. So I say, for 5 years, 10 years, and 20 years, I say to continue to invest in not only Black businesses, but HBCUs. When you invest in the HBCUs, you're allowing HBCUs to produce the political leaders that we need, the doctors, the teachers, lawyers, regardless of the profession, you're investing into Black individuals, Black professionalism. So I heavily emphasize investing into our HBCUs.
To piggyback off of what Tyra said, I would say, as far as the investment process, because I totally agree, Tyra, as far as the investment process, sending more students to HBCUs is an investment in itself. Because not only is that just investing in HBCU, but it's investing in the student as well. And so I think with sending more and more and advocating for HBCUs a bit more stronger and having basically opportunities and placing HBCUs as an opportunity, a high opportunity, and not just a to the side opportunity for students in predominantly Black and Latinx school systems, I think would be very influential and very impactful, especially for the 5 to 10 years. As you can see, more and more students are now gearing towards HBCUs because they see what it's like being at PWIs. And that's not to shun PWIs at all, but it's just to say that it's so much better to invest into an HBCU because the HBCU is going to invest into you. As well as she said, investing into Black-owned businesses, because that's going back into us. That is going back into our community and feeding us. It may not be directly feeding us, but it's directly feeding someone who looks like us. And so I think there's no better way than to invest, like she said, in HBCUs. And so in 5 to 10 years, I think that should be the goal ultimately. And I think that goal can be met because we're deciding to make that change and to take that first step towards it.
Thank you both for jumping in. Thank you. That was kind of an off-the-cuff question. So thank you all for being nimble and flexible on that. And considering, tangible goals that we can be looking at in the future to know that our Get Out the Vote initiatives on HBCUs were, successful by seeing the ways that our communities invest in HBCUs after seeing Get Out the Vote initiatives and invest in Black businesses. And also just, of course, seeing more young Black people working not only to get out the vote, but to fight voter suppression. So thank you all for being nimble and jumping in on a question from the audience. And thank you for the question, Brad. It's a great question. Moving on to our next question, what are the issues that you feel that candidates should address specifically around HBCUs, if there are any that you think that candidates should be addressing around HBCUs? And as you answer this question, I want us to keep in mind that there are Black students at PWIs, at Hispanic serving institutions or HSIs. There are Black students at all sorts of schools. And if your answer could apply to Black students at other schools, feel free to share that it could apply there. But what are some issues that you feel that candidates should be focusing on for HBCUs?
Okay, I'll be short and simple. So I feel that one of the issues, the main issues ultimately that I feel a candidate should address around HBCUs is the main issue that we all discuss, which is funding. As a student who attends a historically Black college, I do feel that there are several issues to be addressed around HBCUs, especially if you attend an HBCU. You know what it's like being a historically Black, going to a historically Black college university. However, I believe the basis of the dialogue, like I said, should be funding. And as a student who attends a smaller HBCU, it's very seldom when my institution receives large sums of funding compared to other institutions. And so I think that really has to play a part into it. You've seen it in the with Donald Trump when he said that he saved HBCUs because of the bill that was supposedly, where it was basically going to be taking money out of the STEM program. And so he said that instead of him passing that bill, he saved HBCUs based off of that. So as I said, funding is a really big deal that I think that the candidates should touch on, and figuring out different ways to accommodate and to appease every HBCU institution and not just specific institutions. And yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you so much. Definitely HBCUs are historically and criminally underfunded. And so providing funding opportunities for all HBCUs is important. And thank you for shedding some light on that. Would love to hear from Jenita. Jenita, what are some things that you would like a candidate to focus on regarding HBCUs and Black students?
I definitely agree with Kalea. I have like funding in big, huge letters. I just think, especially with Kamala being a candidate, I think that one of the main things that actually convinced me to go to HBCU was her speech at Howard. And I think that her experience and giving her perspective on HBCUs and Howard in general would definitely just let people know that it's not just going to the school, it's the experience after graduating from the school too. We have so many people that come to the events and all the things, and we go viral and things like that, but there's also like giving the money back. And I can definitely understand what Clay is discussing when it comes to smaller HBCUs, because going to Howard, we're considered a bigger HBCU. We get a lot of funding and we're still having issues. So I know that going to a smaller HBCU can be a really trying time as well.
So in addition to funding, because that's always the big one, I think 3 other things that HBCUs need that I feel like our government at this point has been long overdue for: access, representation, and good publicity. I'll start with publicity because I feel like that's like the number one thing. It's always interesting to me that in a city that has a HBCU and a PWI, if something goes wrong with the HBCU, and it's like the first thing on the news. It is the first thing in the papers. However, everything done at a PWI may be swept under the rug. And that's definitely on purpose. So I think good publicity is something that HBCUs need. I think representation, we should be in the room, in a lot of rooms, and not just the token, but in the room, because we have, I think one of the other panels says, a perspective that others don't have. I know one thing, HBCUs, not everyone survives. Not everyone can graduate from an HBCU. It takes a lot of grit and finding your own way and creating your own path. And I think that type of representation, number one, needs to be in rooms and should be allowed in rooms and not seen as tokenism. And also access, trying to fight against some of these bigger universities for the same opportunities for internships, for assistantships and fellowships. It's just honestly not a super fair playing field. If your uncle or your cousin can just get you in with a phone call, meanwhile, I have to go through all these checks and balances just to get my application even on the same desk as yours. So access, representation, and publicity, in addition to funding, of course.
Thank you for that, Alex. Thank you. You're right. HBCUs get a bad rap. People make up really ignorant things about HBCUs, and having political candidates who support HBCUs and support the education of Black students at HBCUs is going to be important. Do you have anyone else who would like to jump in on this question?
Yes, I'll just add something really small because I definitely want to echo what Alex just said. And I think one thing that that many HBCUs and PWIs battle with, and I think those are sporting programs. And it'll just be keep it straight. When it comes to HBCUs, just college in general, there's just everyone has their own passion. There's their own profession that they want to go into, and sports saves a lot of lives, especially in inner city communities and minority communities. So with that being said, with the PWIs who receive millions, if not multi-million dollar contracts and investing into their sporting programs that they send Black students in particular to, is you just have that missing piece of the fact that when they're at those PWIs, all they get when it comes to those PWIs is the fact that they do sports. You don't have a lot of PWIs that gear their students towards other things, whereas at HBCUs, we may not heavily weigh sports because there's other things that they are talented in. And most of the time it's either academic, business, computer science, pre-med, whatever the case may be. HBCUs gears those students towards having them successful in the long run, not just short term. So with that being said, I think when it comes to HBCU funding and access, I think we need to paint the whole picture of not just allowing your Black students to come to your institution and just focus on one thing. Have them be well-rounded in all aspects. And I think HBCUs do an excellent job at making sure their students are well-rounded in all aspects. And I think when it comes to sports in particular, I think HBCUs deserve way more credit than what they receive right now when it comes to sports. They definitely need more funding when it comes to sports, so that way they can also prepare their students to go off into leagues, whereas you have these predominantly white institutions, and not to bash any predominantly white institutions, but I think that HBCUs deserve a spot as well to gear their students towards being successful in professional leagues. So if we can also focus on just generalizing in a whole aspect in terms of having HBCUs have more funding than what we're credited for, and not just in specific departments, but I think the all-around effect, I think that would be great.
Thank you for that. We have another question from our audience, and it's so ironic because a similar question was up next, but thank you so much, Racine Tucker Hamilton. I said your whole name because I like it. Sorry, it just sounds so nice. And Racine's question is, can you share some Get Out the Vote activities that you are currently involved in, specifically on your HBCU campuses? How are you mobilizing your fellow students? So let me repeat the question again. Can you all share some specific Get Out the Vote activities that you are involved in on your HBCU campuses, and how you are specifically getting your fellow students, your peers, to go out and vote?
Okay, I'll speak real fast. So I would probably say one of the two main things that I can really think of is I personally partnered, me and the other fellows on my campus, we have personally partnered with our Student Government Association Deputy Director and Director of Civic Engagement. And so, as well as our Blue Voter Society. And so we partner with them to basically host blueprint events. The events include voter registration, absentee ballots, census, and so much more. And so it just kind of goes into depth if you have any questions, if you don't know. And we present this at our cafeteria on campus. Students are always going to eat. So students are constantly coming in and out of the cafeteria to basically see it. So they get that exposure to what it's like to vote, what it's like. And we've had many instances where students have had questions. And so if they needed to reach us, we're there every day. Another thing that we've done, or that I've done, was we've brought on, a student brought on personally someone who's running locally within our community. And she's running for criminal district court judge. She goes by the name of Angel Harris. She came in and spoke with a group of students, and she expressed her platform and basically told us what it is that she wishes to do within the community. And so that was also a good avenue and a good way to get students to know, hey, it's not just only important to vote nationally, it's also very, 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 if not more important, to vote locally. And so that's one of the two main things I would say is hosting voter registration deals and events, as well as having local candidates come in and speak to your students as well to kind of give them a gist of everything.
I also wanted to add, as reproductive justice fellows, Tyra, Kalea, and I have also gotten an amazing swag ambassador. We've gotten all these gorgeous things, you know, t-shirts, hats, masks, and everything. And I've just handed them around to my friend group. I'm sure they probably handed them around on our campuses. And we post things on our Instagrams, our other social media handles, and just letting people know to vote, and just showing all the amazing things that we as Black women and as fellows on our campus can do to get out the vote.
Thank you, Jenita. So I haven't had the opportunity to be on a physical campus. However, I do serve as the program manager for the Next Generation Leadership Institute, which is a 2-year paid fellowship opportunity that trains HBCU students to become reproductive justice leaders. So as Jenita mentioned, she had the opportunity to serve as a swag ambassador throughout our Reproductive Justice Week of Action, which occurred from September 28th through October 2nd, which was just a few weeks ago. So we mobilized our communities about the importance of getting out the vote and going to the polls this election cycle. So we had the opportunity to showcase why voting is important to us, why voting is important to our communities, and what is at stake this election for our community. And we did that by getting on our social media platforms and really, like Jenita mentioned, we had on really cool swag that unified us across our movement. So everyone knew exactly how we were exercising our voices digitally, but also within our communities. Yeah.
So I just wanted to jump in, but as an organization, the 50, we recently created a toolkit that had links to voter registration applications, absentee ballot applications, and also deadlines. And we did that for every single state. You can actually find the link on our Instagram at the 50 if you need any of that information. But we've really been dedicated to spreading information, making sure that students are voting correctly and also on time. For example, I remember hearing a couple weeks ago that people were having issues in Virginia because they were filling out their ballots in blue ink as opposed to black ink, and that makes it invalid. So just making sure that students know the specific details to make sure that they're able to vote.
Thank you so much for jumping in on that, Grace, especially speaking to the ballot issue, which is kind of a form of voter suppression, right? In the state of Virginia, and I know several of us live in Maryland and DC and Virginia, so we're right there. What happened was the envelope said you could use blue or black ink, but then when you would open up the actual ballot, it said you could only, I'm so sorry for the truck that is outside if you all can hear that. But for the actual ballot, once you open it up, it said you can only use black ink. Well, if I read the front of the envelope first and I missed that instruction on the inside, as Grace pointed out, now my ballot is invalid. Well, that's a form of suppression because you're not giving me the proper information and the proper tools to vote. So with that being said, I would love to kind of ask a follow-up question. What are some challenges that we're seeing for HBCU students getting out the vote? What are some challenges that you all are seeing?
I think for me personally, not just on my HBCU campus, but just the people just in my circle, I think a lot of people have difficulty even seeing the importance of voting. Like with the way that our government is set up, a lot of people I know within my family system, in my brother's area of expertise, just do not see the importance of voting and even getting out because they think that our government is so flawed that their voice doesn't have importance.
Wow, you just opened up a whole new issue area of non-voters, people who are choosing not to vote because they feel disenchanted And we are essentially asking people to engage in a system that does not put them first historically. That is definitely a challenge. I know when we did our listening tour this past summer, that was a recurring theme, right? Of young people saying, I don't want to engage this system because this system doesn't value me, or I don't think my vote will be heard. I don't think my lawmakers will listen. So thank you so much for just opening that up and, you know, bringing attention to how that feels and how that impacts our civic engagement. Thank you so much for opening that up, Jenita. You're absolutely right, and the numbers say it. People don't feel like they're being heard. Giovanni, would you like to?
I would. I feel like both you and Jenita seamlessly tied those 2 points together. I feel as if within the conversation of why it is important for us to emphasize GOTV initiatives at HBCUs is because oftentimes what we're seeing is that the voices of Black women are not being centered in these conversations. The voices of students who attend HBCUs are often left out or marginalized within these conversations. So I'm so happy that we have a space provided today where our voices are amplified. We are centering HBCUs. We're centering why it's important to vote for us. We're centering the voices of Black women tonight. So I'm really appreciative that we're having this dialogue because this is what's important. This conversation right here is what's important. And more conversations like these need to occur so we can really shift that narrative from being, you know, a narrative where we're not included. So our voices, the issues that matter to us, are at the forefront.
Thank you so much for that. You talk about seamless points. Here's a seamless point here, is that HBCUs traditionally are very male focused. They're very patriarchal. There's a lot of respectability politics at HBCUs. And I say this with love. You know, HBCUs are kind of just hotspots for patriarchy and respectability politics, and that results in silencing Black women. As Megan Thee Stallion said in her op-ed this past week, Black women aren't really allowed to be passionate. As soon as you are passionately expressing yourself, you're angry. And even though HBCUs, you know, were built for Black students, it still happens at HBCUs too. You know, like HBCU campuses aren't immune to, you know, struggling with allowing women, Black women's voices to be centered, whether we're passionate, whether we are chilling, whether we are crying, whether we are screaming, whether we are laughing, whatever voice it is, it needs to be heard, period. So I really thank you for bringing that in. We do have a question from the audience that I think ties in, and it is, how can Black men who aren't on campus help with some of these specific initiatives around getting out the vote? And I'll take that a little further, specifically with supporting Black women at HBCUs. So how can a Black man be an ally? Giovanni, if you want to jump in.
Absolutely. So I just want to thank the participant who asked that question. I feel as if one key way that folks in general can support is by uplifting and supporting Black women when in just your everyday life, in your everyday interactions. So it could be just as simple as in your everyday life you're taking on, I will support Black women. However, I know specifically we're speaking to getting out the vote. So if you have folks in your family who are women who attend HBCUs and they are women, encourage them to vote, encourage them to exercise their voices. I feel like that is something very easy we can do at an individual level. And also, I think we all at this point have access to a mobile device. So you have access to, you know, digital platforms. If you want to take it a step further, I would say start to organize digitally. Start to use your messaging on your social media platforms to encourage Black women to get out and vote, and ensure that folks have the right information. Earlier in the conversation, we discussed how voter suppression is starting to look a lot different. They're using tactics such as pin colors to, you know, eliminate our votes at this point, which is mind-blowing and mind-boggling to even think that it's occurring, but it's occurring. And I would also encourage folks to visit our website, Black Women Vote. I'm sorry, let me get the actual blackwomen.vote. So if you need state-specific information to get out the vote and you would like to share it with Black women, please share that information. It is vital. It is vital to, at this point, our lives, that we really get out and vote.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat for everyone. While I do that, Grace, let's hear from you on ways that Black men can be allies to Black women and ensuring that their voices are heard.
Yeah, I really do think it comes with like the day-to-day like interacting with women and making sure that even if it doesn't necessarily have to do with voting, it's just a woman who is maybe confiding in you, like take her seriously and show her that you value what she's saying. Because I feel like a lot of times women in general, but especially Black women, their opinions, beliefs aren't viewed as important. And because of that, a lot of women tend to just not say anything at all or not express the fact that they're hurting. So I feel like that really just making an effort in your daily life to make sure that you're taking a step back and kind of just reframing the way that you think, because at the end of the day, the society that we live in, we all kind of have internalized misogyny and misogynoir, like against Black women, and we really all have to make a daily effort, and men especially have to make a concerted effort to reframe that so that we're empowering women and empowering Black women so that we can express ourselves, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yes, empowerment as a tool of support, most definitely. We have just 5 minutes left if we, want to be respectful of everyone's time, but we do have 2 really great questions in the queue, and I do have one final question that I would like everyone to answer. So if we can get 1 answer per question on these 2 in the queue, and then everyone can give a timely answer to our last question, I think we can wrap up and be respectful of everyone's schedules on a Thursday evening. So this is an anonymous question. It says, how can non-Black people support Black people and Black women as they practice their civic responsibility of voting in a way that does not come off as disrespectful? So if one of you would like to kind of quickly, succinctly answer that. Again, how can non-Black people support Black people and specifically Black women to practice their civic responsibility of voting in a way that does not come off as disrespectful?
I would definitely say quickly that as a student who was born and raised in the suburban areas where the Black percentage is less than 10, I would definitely say as a non-Black person, there is a fine line difference between being an ally and trying to speak up for the Black community on their issues. So when it comes to being an ally, you just have to remember the fact that, one, recognize your privilege and recognize the fact that you will never experience what Black people experience, let alone what Black women experience. And Malcolm X has said it best, that the most unprotected person in America is a Black woman. So acknowledge the fact that the things that are happening to Black women, you may never experience in your lifetime. So take that privilege and understand that you can help them. You can also become an ally, become knowledgeable on the things that matter to us, on why the things are happening to us, and how you can educate and encourage others around you to, one, even though this shouldn't be something that we should encouraging, but in 2020, you have to encourage, one, how to be an ally and not be racist or discriminatory, why all people deserve human rights regardless of their background. And just in general, just encouraging people around you to recognize the privilege that many people have in society that Black women don't, and how you can be an ally to them, so that way you all will be viewed as on an equal plane.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I think it's important to recognize that as a non-Black person, there's definitely a fine line between being an ally and kind of overstepping and being disrespectful. So making sure that you're not towing that line is important. Thank you so much, Tyra. We have a question from Gabby, and Gabby said that, I see you all have captions today. That's awesome. She did use exclamation points. What do you think the importance is of making spaces accessible for the Black disabled community and Black disabled students? And that's, including physical, mental, invisible disabilities, visual, audio impaired, and, especially during voting season. So again, to kind of succinctly wrap up that question, what is the importance of making spaces accessible for the Black disabled community, particularly Black disabled students during the election season?
I think it's extremely important to celebrate all Black identities. I think one thing the media often does is, like, if you're a certain skin complexion, or you have a certain type of hair, or you have a certain body shape, those are the Black people that are celebrated. And I think we often forget that there's so many ways to be Black. There's so many different identities in being Black. Like melanin, like the spectrum is just endless. So I think if you're going to say, I stand for Black people, you can't say that without standing for Black people who have mental health disabilities, or disabilities, period. I think a lot of able-bodied people don't even realize that's a privilege. And I personally think that we all have a privilege. So if I'm able-bodied and I can walk and I'm a Black woman, yeah, I may have a few marginalized identities, but I still have some type of privilege. And just like anyone else who has a privilege that other people don't have, that is an opportunity to be an ally. You can still be a Black woman and still be an ally for someone else who doesn't experience your same privileges. So it's extremely important that when we say Black lives matter, Black people matter, that we are talking about all Black lives. We're talking about all Black people, especially during this time when our voices are being diminished on a daily.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Alex. I agree. Black lives don't matter if all Black lives don't matter. And that's going to be queer Black lives, that's disabled Black lives, that's immigrant Black lives. All Black lives have to matter. And speaking specifically to the disability point, using your privilege if you aren't disabled, and uplifting the voices of disabled Black folks who are working in voter suppression and getting out the vote and grassroots organization or organizing is super important. Uplifting the voices of Black disabled folks is super important during the election season. Even physical polling places oftentimes aren't accessible. There aren't wheelchair ramps. You want people to stand in line for 6 hours. I mean, able-bodied people can't stand in line for 6 hours. How is someone who uses an assistive device to stand and walk supposed to do that? So making sure that we're speaking up and we're amplifying their voices and making sure that they matter and that they're represented is extremely important. So thank you for that question, Gabby. And for bringing a super important lens to this conversation. So we are right after 7, but I do want us to end on a bit of a positive note, because I know some of the things we touched on were like a smidge heavy. So the final question that I have for each one of you, and I'll just go ahead and call your name one by one, in one word: what is giving you hope or fueling your power this election cycle? So what is giving you hope or fueling your power this election cycle? And because you're right on my screen, Alex, we're gonna go ahead and start with you. One word, what's fueling you?
It's more of a phrase, but the fact that we didn't say COVID hit, the phrase going on right now, due to COVID, this is canceled. The fact that the support for voting and getting the vote out there hasn't been canceled because of COVID gives me a lot of hope.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's jump to Grace. Grace, what is fueling you this election cycle?
I would definitely say the youth as a kind of general term, just because of all the people my age and the people that look like me that I've seen protesting and being active within the last few months, especially. It's definitely rejuvenated me and made me feel like I really need to be using my voice a lot more than I was.
Perfect. So COVID not canceling the ballot boxes, making us feel rejuvenated, and seeing our peers getting out there and making their voices heard makes us feel rejuvenated, which I love that word. We're going to keep rejuvenated, Grace. We like that. Giovanni, let's jump into it. What's giving you hope? What's fueling you during this very messy election cycle?
Yes, so what's fueling me, also piggybacking off of Grace, is working with the youth, like seeing the next generation of leaders so empowered, so emboldened, utilizing their voices, wanting to get out to the polls, and really amplifying the voices of their communities as well is so hopeful. So I'm just like in awe of them.
The kids are all right. The kids are all right. Alrighty. Let's see. We have Jenita. What is giving you hope?
For me, it's Black women. I feel like Black women have been showing up and showing out. Last election cycle, I think we were like 90+% came and voted. So it's always us for me.
Period. Tyra, what's giving you hope?
I'll say 2 words. I'll say the education and the attention. So even though the world seems like it's at a halt, it's at a standstill with everything that's going on, I really do appreciate the last few months of everyone that's been coming out, not only just protesting, but educating each other regardless of the ethnicity. Everyone has been feeling more comfortable with letting people know what's right, what's not right, and just the level of education that people started bringing out and showing to the public. I'm very hopeful for the fact that, one, many people who aren't just considered a minority, they're paying attention now. More people are starting to turn their heads now to the issues that Black women and Black people in general are facing. So I'm really appreciative and hopeful for the level of education and the attention that is still generating now over the issues that are currently occurring. And I'm very hopeful for what's going to happen because of those 2 things.
Thank you so much, Tyra. Finally, last but most certainly not least, we got Miss My DU over here representing very proudly. Don't act shy now. You knew you wore your shirt.
Right. So I don't have one word, but I will say my peers is what's giving me hope. Black women is what's giving me hope. More and more people are waking up is what gives me hope. More and more people are becoming aware of the different adversities that not only just Black people, but humans we face every single day. And so I think seeing that really, really affirms and gives me hope to keep pushing. And lastly, of course, my ancestors, because they paved the way. They fought for this. They fought for me to be here. And without them, I would not be here. And so that fuels my passion. That fuels me every day to continue. And lastly, in our own voice, reproductive justice, without me being a fellow, I do not know how I would have been able to navigate my voice. And so those are the things that give me hope.
Well, I will say you all give me hope. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, for sharing your insight as Black women and as HBCU students. And you know, it's a rough election cycle. We all know it's rough. It's very messy and it's scary, but we're here for each other. As we wrap up, I just once again want to, on behalf of Platform, send so much love and gratitude and warm, fuzzy feelings to, in our own voice, the National Black Women's Reproductive Justice Agenda. Just virtual hugs. Thank you so much. Virtual hugs, virtual hugs.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, we're indebted to you. We're very grateful for you bringing your expertise to the table. We would like to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us this evening. To each and every one of our panelists, I thank you all for just the intelligence, the well thought out responses, the support. Honestly, it's the Black women for me. As Jenita said, it's the Black women for me. So shout out to you all. Thank you all for, shedding new light on some of our questions, providing, us with additional lenses, specifically, to disability rights, and do all Black lives matter? What are we going to do about that? And to our audience for these amazing questions, for sticking with us on a Thursday evening, when so many of us have Zoom fatigue. Thank you so much to our attendees. It's amazing. This was a great conversation. As we say goodnight, please keep in mind that you can go to blackwomen.vote and get involved with different ways to get out the vote. Please visit Platform Women, and I believe that link was already shared for our listening tour report. It's in here somewhere. It was shared in the chat. Please go ahead and check out our report. Young people have so much political power, and we have every right to use it. And then finally, for all of our Black women and femmes and non-binary identifying folks, please join us for our community hour on October 20th at 6 p.m. So that's going to be next week. Please join us for that community hour as we, just give each other some support during a very ugly, election cycle. So again, thank you.